The Pitt-Rivers Museum, part of Oxford University, has removed from view a mask. It comes from the Igbo culture in Africa. This mask must not be seen by women. So to be fair, they haven't put it on public display because women can't see it. Men can, but women can't. So my question really is, in the 21st century, should this diktat be in operation, really? I mean, is it the right thing to do? That sort of an ancient culture comes up with this sexist idea. This is for men only. And here in Oxford, in Britain, the bosses of Pitt-Rivers Museum say, yes, we'll stick to that. Women can't see this. I think it seems rather strange in this day and age. Let's talk to historian and broadcaster Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Hello, Rafe.
Great to see you, Kevin.
Always a pleasure. What are your thoughts on this? I want to respect the Igbo culture, but this is the museum that until not so long ago was famous for its very popular collection of shrunken heads, that used to go on. And they took those all off display because Black Lives Matter didn't like it very much. And now there's this one mask that... by the way, Pitt-Rivers Museum is, of course, you won't be surprised to hear, in the process of decolonising itself, whatever the hell that means. A diktat by an ancient culture that women can't see a mask, I don't necessarily think... It doesn't chime well with me that a modern university in 21st century Oxford should say, well, we'll go along with that. Women can't see it. That's sexist, antediluvian, and not acceptable today, right?
Yeah, it's such a ridiculous story, this, and it goes to the heart of the cancer, if I can say that, at the center of this woke movement, which is completely ridden with hypocrisy and is ultimately completely anti-Western because they tolerate things happening in non-Western cultures that they would never tolerate happening in our culture. And they, in defending this decision, they said, we take cultural safety seriously. What the hell is cultural safety? We've just had a huge campaign in this country launched by the Guardian newspaper and supported by people like the curators of this museum to have the male-only Garrick Club open its doors to women on the ground that it's sexist not to do that. Well, I'm sorry, same-sex clubs are part of British culture, yet these same people were outraged that this British cultural institution wouldn't allow women in. Never mind the fact that places like the University Women's Club, founded in the 19th century, don't allow men in.
Rafe, there's a plethora. There are... I don't know how many, but I can almost count myself at least 20 women's private members clubs that don't allow men in. That apparently is okay, but if it's the other way round at the Garrick... And by the way, you have all these members like Stephen Fry that have been members for donkey's years. All of a sudden, oh, this is wrong, we've got to stop it. Well, why have you been a member for the last 20 years? That is just a sort of side issue, really. But you know what I'm saying. Let's get back to these masks. As I say, I would suggest, I mean, they're not actually putting this particular mask on display for reasons of cultural safety. Don't know what that means either. But I would suggest that this kind of policy is against British equality laws.
Exactly. Well, that's my point here. They're perfectly happy to perpetuate genuine misogyny and backwards thinking when it comes from non-European cultures. And you've got to ask, why is that? Are they themselves being racist? Do they think that these cultures, that the people from Nigeria who are Igbo, don't know any better? That they've got to be accepted, or is this, as I've said, I think it's just plainly double standards and hypocrisy. It's disgusting either way. And the real thing here we're discovering, the real issue of our time really, is cultural relativism. It's this idea that all cultures around the world are equal and deserving of the same respect. And I'm terribly sorry, but the Igbo culture is undeveloped compared to our advanced civilization. They're not on the same lines. And so for us to kowtow and take the knee to them essentially and say, well, it's fine for you to be misogynistic. We have to accept your culture. I'm sorry, it's not. This is not an enlightened culture. You know, a couple of years ago, the BBC reported an Igbo couple in their 30s committed suicide because they were unable to marry because one of them was a descendant of slaves. And in Igbo culture today, people who descend from slaves aren't allowed to stand for elected office. They can't get into elite
Huh.
society. They can't marry people who didn't descend from slaves. That's what we're dealing with here. And the and the other thing that gets me is the hypocrisy here, because you know we had the statue of Edward Colston toppled. This was a man who wasn't directly involved in the slave trade. He was deputy governor of the Royal
Yeah,
African
yeah, yeah,
Company.
yeah.
The Igbo people actually enslaved other Igbo people. They, in
Mm,
fact, also sacrificed them and often buried them alive with their
mm.
slave owners. And yet, so, you know, that culture is being revered here.
Yeah.
We've also had the case at this very same museum of the Pitt-Rivers Museum, the Benin bronzes being returned to Africa and reverentially treated as great artifacts to be revered. Well, I'm sorry, the Benin bronzes were commissioned by African slave owners, and they depict the slave owners themselves. And they've now gone from being on public display here, they've gone into the private collections of the descendants of those same slave owners. I mean, the hypocrisy is off the
It's off
scale.
the scale. Now, Ruth Millington, an art critic and author, she makes a very good point. She says to deny all women of all cultures sight of something because of some sort of taboo is wrong in a modern, liberal, and enlightened society. She says, surely women should be given the right to decide, after reading about these cultural sensitivities, whether or not they want to look at this mask. Who made this decision that women must not set their female eyes on this artwork, this mask? Who made the decision? Was it men? Was it men going, we mustn't let the little ladies see this? They're trying to be progressive and modern and woke, and they're coming up with ancient, repressive, sexist policies towards women. So they're disappearing up their own woke backsides and getting it all wrong, I would suggest.
Yeah, well, this is a phenomenon we see in almost every sphere of life today. The feminists who get so angry about the most minor sort of microaggression or the mansplaining or the man spreading, that's deserving of a double-fold spread in The Guardian. Never once do they comment about the misogyny in Islamic culture present in our big urban cities. You know, from Birmingham to London to Blackburn, misogyny is on the rise at the same time that the white British population is declining. That's never spoken about. When did you ever hear a feminist actually attacking Islamic culture for misogyny?
Oh, they never
And it's
do, no.
you never do. And it's the same thing here. There is a tolerance given to non-European cultures for
Yes.
practices that would never be allowed here. And it needs to be called out because, you know, it's so disingenuous. And it really shows that this is all about nihilism. This is a hatred of your own
Yep.
culture. This is a
Yep.
hatred of Britain. It's an erosion of everything that we've done. And in a sense, we're going backwards. You know, we are a liberal society and we're becoming increasingly illiberal. You know, homophobia, misogyny, anti-Semitism, all on the rise in London. London is now the most homophobic part of the entire country, and that's because of the importation into this country of people from cultures where it is
Where
illegal and you
where
can be
it's
put to death for
taboo.
it.
Yeah.
And yet nobody on the left is able to call this out because it goes against that trump card, which is racism, and race trumps everything else in our society. And you know, in Nigeria now, there's a program called African Magic, and it's hugely popular. And old superstitions, which had long died a death,
Mm.
are now coming back into practice. And you have to wonder if people like the Pitt-Rivers Museum are willing to forbid women from seeing a mask. Where does this leftist ideology take you? How long until they tolerate other bizarre practices here?
But
You know, the Metropolitan Police in London now have a witchcraft department to train police officers in how to detect child abuse cases linked to
yeah, no,
witchcraft.
that's a serious side of things. And as I say, just to crystallize this, this is clearly a decision made by men. because women aren't allowed to see this mask. So they've looked at this mask and said, well, women can't see this. And so they've told all women, you're not allowed to see it. Ruth Millington.
Oh, I think female curators probably were involved in this too, because we know for a fact.
Well, if they were allowed to see it.
If they're allowed to see it, but yeah.
Ruth Millington says that as a feminist and art historian, I now want to see it all the more. So I hope women queue around the block to try and have a look at this mask. Rafe, great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much. Excellent contribution, characteristically from Rafe Heydel-Mankoo.